So we left off talking about the refute against the counter argument. Um, and typically, the most common refute is that the Earth cycles don't usually occur within 50 to 70 years, like we've seen with the huge spike in CO2 since 1950. And the counter argument also usually fails to address the undeniable relation between the increase in global average temperature and then the increase in the spike in greenhouse gas emissions. So the counter argument also usually relies way too much on history and events that occurred even like hundreds of thousands of years in the past to back up its argument rather than uh, this side of the argument, which usually is based around modern day examples and statistics, which is what really should be looking at because this global warming event is an anomaly even within the Earth's cycles, which already are usually anomalies in and of themselves. So, moving on to the argument of how global warming is a natural cycle. Um, this side of the argument just believes that global warming is another one of the phases that the Earth goes through. And with the Earth being notorious for being unpredictable and sporadic, um, at times, like just looking at earthquakes, which are still to this day, even with all the technology advancements, usually unpredictable. Um, Looking at a quote from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, we can see that the Earth's climate change can change in multiple timescales from years to decades, centuries, and millennia. Even though we're usually familiar with cycles occurring within hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years, uh, the fact of the matter is that things can occur within even just decades at a time, and that could potentially be what we're seeing here today. Is what this argument believes, and um, one of those, the other things that back us up this side of the argument is a cycle known as the Milankovitch cycle, which comes about by changes in the orbit around the sun, the Earth has around the sun. And a big aspect of this cycle is something known as the planetary albedo, which is basically just surface reflectivity that the Earth has from the sun. And this quote from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, published in 2014, says that even a slight increase in solar radiation at northern latitudes can increase ice melt, which in turn causes less sunlight to be reflected from the bright white surface of the ice and more sunlight to be absorbed by the Earth. And basically, what this is saying is that uh, the global warming that we're seeing today isn't necessarily from years and decades of humans releasing greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, but it's just a cycle that is caused by this planetary albedo, which is completely separate from human actions because we don't have any impact on how the Earth orbits the sun. And then moving on to this side of the argument's refute against the counter argument, I have a quote from the U.S. Geologic Survey published in 2017, and it says that Earth's natural warming and cooling periods happen extremely fast at approximately 10,000 to 15,000 years. What this is saying is that we are in an interglacial period right now, and there's often periods of warming within that interglacial period that fluctuate from the standard average surface temperature. And this is supported by looking back at the medieval warming period, which was a warming period from the 10th to the 13th centuries, where the average surface temperature, was also about 1 degree Celsius warmer, just like today. And you have to keep in mind that during that time, though, there was pretty much no greenhouse gas emissions because there was not really any technology advancements or industry occurring at that time. And the fact that this medieval warming period occurred from the 10th to 13th century, which is a very short amount of time in the grand scheme of the Earth, only 300 years, that could easily relate to what we're seeing today. So basically what that's saying is that the warming period we see today could just be fluctuations that are occurring within this interglacial period that we're seeing. And then moving on to going back to how global warming is a man-made phenomenon. This is kind of a more opinionated standpoint, and I feel like there's just too many facts favoring the belief that global warming is caused by humans to deny it. Um, the statistics don't lie, and they illustrate how much global temperature has increased, and the direct relation there is between the industrial revolution and increases in advancements in industry and technology that are pretty much just undeniable. And if the statistics aren't enough, there's proof in the natural world that you can see um, coral bleaching from the ocean temperatures rising, and changes in migration patterns with animals um, migrating south much later in the year, and going back much sooner because of the just surface temperature increase, and atypical weather patterns that we haven't really seen long ago in the past due to global warming, and even suffering economies from crops failing because of this surface temperature fluctuations. So I think looking at it from a more global standpoint, I feel like everybody needs to look at this issue for themselves and kind of determine what their stance on it is by looking at the various statistics and other opinions from other people, seeing ultimately what they believe, and perhaps what could be done to help curb this, whether they are for one side or the other. So I hope this presentation cleared up a little bit of the confusion, and maybe provided more insight to sides and opinions that you might not have known about prior. So thank you.